Where we begin today with Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. Senator, where do we go from here?
Well, I sadly think that it's likely now Blanche has the votes. I was deeply disappointed to hear those comments you just aired from one of my colleagues. When you go through a litany of the reasons why somebody shouldn't be confirmed, the fact that they have abused the Department of Justice to go after the president's enemies, the incredibly not just botched but wrongful handling of the investigation into Epstein and his victims, the cover-up of some of those materials on the one hand, on the other hand pushing out materials that expose the victims to being victimized again by publishing their names, their photographs, this slush fund he tried to set up. You go through this long litany of abuses by the Attorney General, and you could have one of two reactions. One is to say, this person should not be the Attorney General, and we're going to oppose him, and we're going to demand the president send us someone better. Or the other is to say, nonetheless, I'm going to support him because the president might send us somebody worse. It only makes sense, I think, to defeat someone like Todd Blanche and insist on something better, insist on someone who will not go along with these collusive settlements, who won't continue to act like the president's criminal defense lawyer. And Nicole, I think you're absolutely right when you said that whether he is confirmed or is an acting, even if he's confirmed, the moment he does something the president doesn't like, the president is more than willing to just fire him. So I think that doesn't give the public any greater protection.
I had Judge Esther Salas and Judge Jack McConnell on yesterday about the vitriol being directed at federal judges in the judiciary from Donald Trump, from the general counsel at the Department of Homeland Security, who has a list called, quote, the worst of the worst about judges, and from Todd Blanche himself. Let me show you what Judge Jack McConnell said yesterday.
What we're seeing right now is out of the executive branch, it appears to be an attempt to delegitimize the courts, and they're doing that through trying to delegitimize judges. The deputy attorney general, soon potentially to be the attorney general, said we're at war with the courts, and he called people to action on it. These kind of things are not acceptable in a democratic society where we follow the rule of law. It's across the board. People appointed by Democratic presidents, people appointed by Republican presidents have been subjected to this personal attack on judges in an attempt to delegitimize them. It's really an attack on the judiciary itself. And the very foundation of our democracy.
Senator, if Democrats retake control of the Senate in the fall, what could you do to hold, in the judge's words there, quote, the executive accountable for what judges themselves say is a clear attempt to, quote, delegitimize the rule of law in America?
Well, I think the judge is absolutely right about what we're seeing go on, and it is well more broad than just the judiciary. We see the president attack the press when the press reports in a way that he doesn't like. Those are enemies of the people, and likewise, any branch of government, including the judiciary, that stands up to the president. And frankly, the judiciary has been the savior, at least the lower courts, during these tumultuous past 2 years. So many of the president's illegal actions have been shut down by judges appointed by both Democratic presidents and Republican presidents. That's been a rare bright side in terms of our democracy. So they're going after it. As part of the majority, if the majority flips, we'll be able to delve into what the department is doing or what they're not doing, what resources are being provided to help protect judges, strengthening those resources as necessary, and I think fully expose this campaign to really endanger some of these lower court judges that we see from both the rhetoric that's being used, but also these constant attacks. To imagine that the Attorney General or acting Attorney General is treating a co-equal branch of government this way would have been unthinkable in the near past, but now it is an everyday occurrence.
Senator, I want to show you something Todd Blanche said that to me seems to invite more questions about criminal prosecutions of people that maybe aren't as notable as a former Olympian. Here he is when asked about Jeanine Pirro's job being on the line.
Decline to say whether you stand by Jeanine Pirro's decision to drop that case. What message does it send, though, if President Trump fires a U.S. attorney because she determined there was not sufficient evidence to charge 4 people with a crime?
Did he fire her?
I mean, what message would it send, I said, if...
Hypothetically, if the president chose to fire a United States attorney, it turns out he's allowed to do that because he's the president of the United States.
I mean, no one was asking him that question. So back to your point about the press, it's a lack of good faith, transparency from that podium. But we know they don't care about the press. What does it say to you, though, that this is a case around which there's friction and that the now likely to be confirmed Attorney General is not standing on the side of the extremely political actor who simply drew a line the way Bill Barr did after Donald Trump lost at this extraordinary play? She simply seemingly refused to manufacture evidence against someone who didn't do what Donald Trump said he did, which was to vandalize the reflecting pool, which instead was destroyed by a crappy contractor who Donald Trump hired in a no-bid contract. What does it say that the Attorney General won't defend his employee who seemingly refused to manufacture evidence?
Well, it's so startling when I hear Blanche say something like that. Turns out the president has a right to do that. What he's basically saying is the president has a right to fire a prosecutor who won't bring an illegitimate case that he wants brought. This is part and parcel with Blanche saying that the president has both a right and a duty to go after his enemies. I listen to statements like that, which are unthinkable for any legitimate prosecutor, and I wonder what happened to the Todd Blanche who was once a respected prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, because he's now unrecognizable. I also feel a sense, and maybe you too, Nicole, of utter vertigo when Jeanine Pirro is now the voice of reason. What world are we living in? How did that happen? But you know that you're in some totally upside down world when she is saying, well, we need to dismiss this case because turns out we don't have any evidence. But this is Blanche, and this is why it's so appalling that he may get confirmed today. This is somebody willing to say the president is more than his rights to fire a prosecutor who doesn't bring an illegitimate case. The president can tell us to bring a case with no evidence against his enemies. That's just fine. He has a right and even a duty to do it. And what's more, I will help him. Todd Blanche is turning DOJ into a sword the president can use to go after his enemies, a shield to protect him from IRS audits and cheating on his taxes, or what his kids are doing or he's doing with meme coins and all the rest of that, all the daily corruption of this White House. Todd Blanche, sadly, we can count on to protect the president. That's why he's the nominee. And for my colleagues in the Senate to go along with this means that whether we have a rule of law in the Justice Department just doesn't matter to them. Not enough to stand up to this president. And this is why our democracy is in such a precarious position right now.
Senator, Todd Blanche is willing to pick up retribution cases that are so shoddy. Lifelong conservative prosecutors like Eric Siebert fled. He refused to bring the first case against Comey. He's willing to throw out prosecutions that are so solid that other lifelong conservatives like Danielle Sassoon fled. And he's willing to pick up the garbage that Pam Bondi wouldn't touch because it stunk of corruption and politicization, which is saying a lot. You've been investigated. I wonder if you fear that you will now be prosecuted.
Nicole, I really don't know, because all they do is work through the press, exactly the opposite of what you're supposed to do in a Justice Department. So all I know about what they've looked into with me is they found nothing and tried to dismiss the case, and were told not to dismiss the case because they might get fired by the president if they do. But this is just par for the course. What I've decided to do, and I think what my colleagues have decided to do, people like Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, and others that have also faced these bogus investigations by the Justice Department, is just do our jobs. no, this is now, sadly, a price of doing our jobs and standing up to this president. But we also know we need to put an end to this. And I hope when we take back the House and the Senate that we can put some constraint on this runaway Justice Department. And I look forward to the time in the future, because I spent almost 6 years in that department, when we can restore the integrity of that department, when we can address the rotting infrastructure of the leadership of that department, and once again have that department stand for justice, because right now it stands for anything but.
Senator Adam Schiff, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today on this momentous day.